that one of the items that the bar is really committed to is how not only can we kind of make better lawyers and serve the public better, but how can we actually serve our profession better? And one of the things we really want to focus on, and that I think the presidents of the bar have been focusing on the last several years, is work-life balance, healthy lives, mental health issues. And so this has been an idea coming for quite a while to address this issue. I know that from my own personal experience and talking to people who I think frankly should be here, that there is a fear of coming to these just for fear that even being at one of these CLEs is an admission of some kind of problem or weakness that you don't want others to know about. And so I would encourage you, for those of you who know people or think of people who could be here or couldn't be here but wanted to, this is going to be recorded. It will be on YouTube and on the State Bar website, or just YouTube?
There'll be a link to it on the State Bar website.
Okay. Within 30 days, there should be. So I would encourage you to do that. If you have friends or colleagues out in Rapid City, Mr. Briggs is going to be presenting out there on Monday. So I would encourage you to encourage them to attend. With that, I want to introduce Mr. Briggs. He's been working in Rapid City for about 34 years. He's a native of California who found his way to beautiful Black Hills. He's one of a specialist in anxiety and depression-related disorders, one of the only specialists in the 3-state area. He's written a book that was published, I believe, in 2000, and after its publication, he became more well-known and has appeared on national TV, radio. He's traveled all over the world to speak on this topic. And he after having treated so many people in the legal profession, and focusing on some things that are unique to our profession that either bring in people who are prone to anxiety or that the profession itself creates, it has come up with some ways that I think can really help us. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Briggs up here to the front of the room.
Is that about right? Let us know if it gets too loud and there's some echoing, or too soft and you can't hear me. Well, I'm pleased to be here. Actually, I was telling Julie, she said, this is old hat for you. Well, I guess that's true. I've been in a lot of places speaking. But when I come and talk locally, that's actually more difficult than speaking internationally, because you really want to impress your peers. And so, yeah, I'm a little nervous today, but I'm excited. And I'm very interested in sharing this information with you. Because if you, and I wouldn't ask for a raise of hands, but if you yourself are not here because you're curious about the topic for yourself, you do know someone that is. I mean, it's just so prevalent. So part of what I want to share with you today is some information that will be helpful to you in understanding this condition and in learning some things so that you can reduce and ultimately eliminate it. That's my goal for this afternoon. Obviously, I cannot tie up ribbons around it for anyone here today. It won't be gone. But what I will be doing is giving you an outline of things that you can pursue if you're interested in eliminating something like this in your life. I do want to encourage questions and comments. I can talk, well, I've talked for 5 days straight when I've presented before. So I've got plenty that I could share with you, but I just assume not, and I'm sure you would just assume that I'm not. The more questions or comments that you make, the the more it becomes applicable, the more interesting. So feel free to stop me. If I think that that would take us away from something I'm going to be talking about later, I'll just have you hold on to that. But interrupt me more than less. Okay? I went to bed early last night after dinner with a group of you, and unfortunately, I woke up at like 12:30 because there was this thing that was just going off. It sounded like a fire alarm, and of course that's because I was asleep. And I looked over and pressed on somebody had set the alarm before they left last time, and so I thought the problem was taken care of, and I went back to sleep. And 10 minutes later it went off again, and 10 minutes later it went off one more time. So I had to get up and yank out the plug and try and figure out how to get back to sleep at that point. But I had the luxury of sleeping in this morning. I should be in good shape. Now I've got to get used to the technology. I want to talk to you about, and this is kind of nice too, because I don't really have a specific schedule. We'll be here till about 4:45 or so, and we'll kind of break when it makes sense. I do have Zambros, which is a local bookstore, coming, and they have a limited amount of books. So if you want those, they'll be here outside, and I would be more than happy to sign them for you if you're interested. So how serious is this in the general public? How prevalent is anxiety? When I was suffering with my anxiety, I got help for myself, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. Suffering with both anxiety and depression. And according to the Surgeon General at that point, 1 out of every 1,000 people suffer with any sort of excessive anxiety. Well, they realized pretty quickly that that's not true. It's a much higher prevalence. Anxiety was 3rd or 4th in terms of mental health conditions that people sought help for years ago. Now they're finding that probably 7 out of 10 people that are in a doctor's office, a general practitioner's office, are there with anxiety and stress-related conditions. And one of the things that I thought of last night as I was having dinner with a group of you was that I should have brought a paper that I hand out to clients, kind of just describing the different ways that anxiety can present itself. It's unbelievable how many different physical symptoms that people can have that are indicative of anxiety and stress-related conditions. Panic attacks, probably most common. Lots of worry, that's what I did. Stomach problems, that was me. You can become depressed as well on top of it because you start to feel helpless and hopeless and overwhelmed. You have muscle aches. Lots of obsessive thoughts and rituals, the obsessive compulsive conditions, a lot of rituals that we go through, and for some people, their life absolutely is paralyzed by some of those rituals that they have to go through, which make no sense to the rest of us, but for them it's something that they think they need to do before they can go and accomplish something. So a lot of times people that use drugs and alcohol are doing so simply because it's a self-medication. It's a societally acceptable way of reducing our stress and anxiety. It's a coping technique, just not very effective. Well, actually, it's a very effective coping technique, but it's got some negative side effects. So, yeah, anxiety, in terms of the way it presents itself, is important. And it is the #1 condition that people seek help for today, far and above depression, far and above drug and alcohol abuse. Drug and alcohol abuse used to be #1 reason that people sought help. 19 million Americans are diagnosed each year That's not 19 million Americans that have anxiety. That's 19 million new ones each year. 1 in 8 suffer with social anxiety in and of itself. And social anxiety is characterized by a fear that I'm going to humiliate myself or make a fool of myself in front of other people. And it can come out in many, many different ways. Probably over 50% of the American population would never do a presentation. Many of the attorneys that I work with, maybe trial attorneys, but they don't like to be in front of people speaking. But some of the interesting ways, I think, that people can suffer with anxiety around social anxiety is one gentleman that I worked with years ago. He was in his mid-20s, and he came in and said, you know, I have this bathroom phobia. So bathroom phobia, I didn't really take it all that seriously until I began to get to know this man and began to realize that he was 24, 25, 26 years old, I can't remember, and he'd never been on a date. Because how do you go on a date and say to your date after about an hour or so, oh, I got to go home. Why do you have to go home? I was having a good time. Well, I have to go to the bathroom. So it's just one more way that people can suffer with social anxiety. 43% of people with anxiety are also depressed or have drug and alcohol as their attempts to self-medicate. So it kind of tells you how overlapping these kinds of things can be. And this is a one that concerns me because all of these statistics are from prior 9/11. Since 9/11, you can imagine that they haven't come up with any national statistics that have brought us back up to date. But 13% of children between the ages of 0 or 1st grade to 12th grade are compromised in their ability to either stay up academically or feel comfortable socially at school because of anxiety. 13%. My wife is a elementary school teacher, and she and I have begun a book about identifying and working with kids in the school system. But once we started writing that, she began to realize that, you know, I really don't want to get this published yet because it's going to be a year or two before she gets retired, and she didn't want me going out and promoting the book by myself. So she kind of wants to go along on those trips. But it should be, very necessary. So, lots of kids that are struggling, and I don't work with children under the age of 10 or 12, but I see a ton of high school kids, teenagers. I've got 3 right now that I'm meeting with, and again, I mentioned last night, I think that many of those kids have been bullied in school. That's part of where their anxiety comes from. And somebody asked last night, how does technology contribute to this? Well, it contributes a lot. Kids used to get harassed at school. I got harassed at school. But now you can harass people 24 hours a day via text or other methods that probably I don't understand because I'm not very technological. You may find that out before the end of the day. We do have somebody to save me, I think, if I get into trouble here. 3 to 5 times more likely to go to the doctor if you have anxiety, 6 times more likely to go to the hospital. Cost of psychiatric and related health care estimated $42 billion. Remember, this is prior to 9/11, so it's much higher than that now. And here's probably the most alarming statistic to me. Less than 1/3 of people that are suffering with anxiety ever get properly diagnosed and treated. So not only do we have 19 million Americans every year that are diagnosed with anxiety, we've got 20 million more that are not. Or excuse me, 40 million more that are not. So part of what I really welcome is the chance to speak to any group so that I can get the word out about just how prevalent this is. And that's why I could say with confidence, if you're not here for yourself, you're here because you know of somebody else around you that's suffering needlessly with anxiety. And I say needlessly because once we begin to realize how approachable and in some ways simple treatment can be, we don't need to suffer with excessive anxiety. We don't need to just cope with it and avoid things. That's the most frustrating thing about working with anxiety is that, having suffered myself, it's still frustrating because people who are anxious avoid like the plague. They come up with lousy excuses, but they'll figure out ways of avoiding difficult situations. And the more we avoid difficult situations, the more our anxiety grows. If we can learn how to approach situations and break it down into small pieces, our anxiety is reduced. Our confidence can grow. But just facing something and not knowing how to break it down, that actually can be difficult. I remember one woman, she was a professor at one of the colleges, and she had come in and begun treatment, and about 3 or 4 sessions into it, her husband came in, and he was kind of a cocky son of a gun, and he said, I understand you told my wife that she needs to learn a few things before she flies. And I said, well, I'm looking forward to having a chance to share that with her. And she goes, well, next week we're supposed to be going on a vacation, and she's coming. Well, she did go. And the only way she could get on the plane was by drinking an awful lot of alcohol. Did that help her anxiety? Yes, in the short run it did. Did it help her confidence? No, absolutely not. So, yeah, there's so many more people out there that are suffering than are actually treated. And, you know, part of what Julie mentioned to you is, I've been all over the country presenting lots throughout this region, and yet I'm the only person in this 3 or 4 states that devotes their whole practice to it, suffered myself at one time, and provides a specialized program. In Los Angeles, where I was raised, there's probably 3 or 4 people in every office that are treating this. But in this 3 or 4 state area, which nice for marketing, but not great for the people that I'm working with. Because last time I taught my program, and this is not unusual, I get a lot of people from Williston. I had a man come down from Williston. It's a 6-hour drive. I get people from Vermillion. I get people from Sioux Falls. So I would like to keep me in mind to come and present to groups if at all possible. I'd like to see something get set up in Sioux Falls. Well, what about attorneys and the people in the legal profession? I see a lot of them, and for various reasons, because of the kind of people that we are. Dentists, teachers, nurses, physicians, and attorneys. That's the main crop of my practice. Why? Because they're very good about helping others, but they're not very good about listening to themselves. They've never learned that. It's not because they're trying to be naughty, but people who suffer with anxiety tend to be people who are great about helping everybody else. It's part of the role we learned growing up. But they are not good about taking care of self. And part of what treatment is about, it's really kind of enjoyable, is starting to find the balance. Just exactly what Julie was talking about before. Finding better balance in our lives. Do we want to go from here, which is burnout? I mean, this is inevitably burnout, Do we want to go from here to the opposite? No. We want to go from here to here. Balance. Taking care of others, but also learning to take care of self. Don't do for others without consulting with self first. Okay? And once those skills are learned, we actually have more to give others because we're not burnt out. But until we learn to do that, this is pretty much inevitable. So we need the very thing that you guys apparently have in your strategic planning. We need to learn balance. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So, yeah, divorce rates, suicide rates, drug and alcohol abuse rates, they're all higher for attorneys and dentists than the general population. So those are the groups that I speak with. Any comments so far? Please, somebody break it down. Yeah.
From my reading on anxiety, and you probably will get to this here shortly, can be kind of a normal thing. But how do you distinguish normal anxiety versus excessive anxiety? And if you're prone to that, how do you do it? I mean, good old-fashioned moderation type of work.
No, I will explain that. That was pretty darn good work, but very shortly.
Okay.
Other thoughts? Yes?
How many alcoholics or drug abusers have possibly the underlying issues that,
Many.
okay.
Many. I consulted at River Park out in Rapid for a while. And it's tough because treatment centers and therapists need to work together. Because if people are just taken off their booze or their drugs and they're not taught how to deal with their stressors, while they're in treatment, they generally do pretty good because they're not doing real life. But once they get out into the world and they haven't learned how to deal with those things well, they relapse. And actually, my graduate thesis was on working with alcoholism and trying to predict, how can you predict when people are going to relapse? And I thought, the only reason, frankly, that I did the doggone research is because the data was there, and I didn't have to gather it. I didn't ever think I'd use the information that I got, but I use it every day. We can pretty much predict when people are going to relapse. What are the factors? Both for anxiety as well as for alcoholism. Isolation. If people try and do it by themselves, it don't work. If people try to keep it a secret, it don't work. It's kind of like promising to stop smoking, but not mentioning it to anybody. I think I'm going to stop smoking. It doesn't work until you make it public, sort of some accountability, and someone can kind of help you to keep your close to the flames. So, yes.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time in your talk to point this out or not, but on the DOR website that you can access through the state bar, it's in the newsletter every month, how to get to that, but there is a test you can take on your own to determine whether you accept it from the time. Just wanted to point that out.
Fantastic.
There's also what's the depression.
Which is a good lead into my question. It strikes me that there seems to be, you specifically indicated, a high correlation between both anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
That whether it's the depressive has anxiety or the anxious person has depression, I don't think matters. But why is that?
Anxiety and depression often go hand in hand. One, depression is when we feel like we either have nothing to offer or we don't have the energy to offer anything. Anxiety is when we've got a lot of energy but we don't know how to channel it. So how can we feel both at the same time? Well, they're both related to the way we think. And what we're going to be talking about here today, particularly in the breakout session, will be very pertinent to that. I do not believe, I was talking with Julie just prior to this beginning, there is a stigma, unfortunately, attached to people that would even come to a seminar like this. I remember being asked to, I mentioned this last night, I went to a presentation on sexual addiction years ago, and one of the first questions that the therapist asked, and didn't get any responses, so how many of you are here to figure out if you've got an addiction? And, you know, it's unfortunate that we do have that sort of stigma attached to anxiety or depression, but I do not believe, I mean, I'm glad for insurance